me I'm working. Okay, wow, let's see if that works. If it does, I apologize for the little intro nonsense of the infinity screen, but it will be much more portable and I can record in other locations. So let's hope this works. And if it's not working, I apologize to all the people who can't see this or hear it or whatever other problem might be going wrong with technology. Prayer. This is a big one, and it's one that we're going to do in many different pieces throughout the Pathways course this year. But prayer is something that is intrinsic to Jewish belief and Jewish practice. It is also a word that is widely used in everyday conversation and widely used in different spiritual traditions that aren't Jewish, and has really, really different meanings in lots of different places. And most of even the official meanings aren't known by the people who use the word. So we're going to try and break it down and then build it back up again. And today we're just going to sort of skim over a few parts to get the big picture idea of what does Judaism think prayer is, why are we praying, what do we mean by all of these blessings that we have, and how this fits together with the broader spiritual practice. In later classes, we'll look into more depth at different parts of the service and both through some of the melodies as well as the meaning for those other things. We good? Okay. So, prayer serves a vital role in connecting us with God. It is analogous to and a replacement for the sacrifices. I like to get the second sentence up there right at the beginning. The first one, everyone goes, yes, prayer, I connect to God, right? And then I say, it's just like sacrifices. And people go, whoa, whoa, whoa. Killing animals doesn't connect me to God. I'm not about killing animals. I want to be spiritual. I don't want to be religious, right? I don't want to follow ancient rituals. I want to be spiritual. It's like, well, yeah, those ancient rituals were designed to be spiritual. I'm not saying that we necessarily need to rekindle the altar today. We're not allowed. But even if we were, it wouldn't necessarily be the top of the list of things to be doing right now. We can talk about that more when we talk about the end of days and the return of and the coming of the Messiah and the restoration of the temple and what that might look like. But for today, just for a moment, understand that sacrifices have a very deep spiritual significance. So how do we know that our ancestors have always felt that? Well, Berachah Avot, which is an amazing section of the Mishnah, which is filled with the aphorisms and teachings of the sages that are not always connected to legal matters, but are more sort of the fortune cookie way of saying things, of small phrases easily remembered that can give you moral instruction or strengthen you in times of need, give you insights that aren't the legal discourses. So it's the collection of the rabbinic proverbs, if you will, or at least one of the main collections. So Berachah Avot, it's in the Mishnah. You can find books of it by itself with great commentary. It's good to have on your bookshelf. You can also find it, of course, on sefaria.org. The world stands on three things. Because anyone here who's ever tried to make a table or chair knows you need three legs for something to be stable. On avodah, and acts of on Torah, on avodah, and acts of loving kindness. Now, Torah, we sort of understand that, right? The Torah scroll or the Torah book, the words of Torah, the teachings of Torah. Without Torah, the world will fall out of balance. It will fall out of kilter. Acts of loving kindness, okay, gimilut chasadim in the Hebrew, the idea that you need to also have acts that are coming from the heart, that are done kindly and done with full devotion to other people. I can see that, yes, definitely stabilizing the world, keeping it in balance. Whoop, there's a doorbell. Would one of you mind running and opening the door?
Hang on.
Thanks. It's good to stretch the legs. I think you guys are younger than I am. So. And I have to wait for the avodah because this one is the tricky one. This is the music they play on hold. Okay, avodah. Ironically, happens to be a word that figures very prominently in this part of the Torah. But avodah can be translated as service. It's the same word that you would use, or the same root word that you would use to get the word servant. But it also can be translated to mean the word worship, because to serve God is to worship God. To worship God is done through service. It is why we call our services services. And this word has come to also mean avodah in the last 2,000 years, prayer. Now, originally, avodah almost certainly in this context was focused on the sacrifices themselves. The structure that God gave us of bringing the different offerings at the different times, on the different days, different holidays, to first the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the wilderness, and then later the temple in Jerusalem. That this was a very important part of maintaining the connection between us and God and the world. And without the sacrifices, everything would fall apart. But the sacrifices stopped 2,000 years ago. Well, they stopped before that during the Babylonian destruction, and then they stopped again after the Roman destruction. And the world's still here. And more importantly, Judaism is still here, because Judaism realized that there is something that is similar to sacrifices that doesn't require a fixed spot, a fixed altar in a fixed set of GPS coordinates. Instead, it is a positive commandment, says the Talmud, to pray each day as it is stated, and you shall serve, do avodah, the Lord your God, from Exodus. They taught that avodah means prayer, as it is stated, and you shall serve him, le'avdo, with all your hearts. The sages asked, what is the service of the heart? This is prayer. And when we say we're going to serve God with our heart, we don't mean we're going to serve him our heart like a sacrifice. It means that we are going to use our heart in God's service. The same way that using the animals was done in God's service, we use our heart. But the animals may have been slaughtered, our heart is not. Instead, the heart, which in biblical and most ancient thinking was the source of all your personality, your thought, your emotion, everything. There wasn't heart-mind split. It was all lumped together, and the heart was the thing that was used as the symbol for that. Remember that every time it says serve God with your heart. We're not talking about just, romantic Valentine's Day heart. We're talking about your whole personality. Therefore, when God says serve with the heart in the Torah, he's not only saying serve with a sacrifice, he's saying this same service can be done with prayer. We know this from later on as well in the Tanakh, in the Bible. O Lord, open my lips and my mouth shall declare your praise, which you will still see as an introductory phrase before we do the Amidah, which we'll talk about what the Amidah is in a little bit, which is the key prayer in any of our daily services. That's said as an intro to prayer. For you do not delight in sacrifice, else I would give it. You take no pleasure in burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, you will not despise. And so the idea being that a person who has a broken spirit doesn't mean like depressed, although certainly God doesn't mind if someone is depressed. It's not like bad, but it means that somebody who is not arrogant, somebody who is willing to bow, to bend themselves and say, I am not the whole important thing in the world, right? I am important, but not the important. And therefore, I'm willing to open myself up. That contrite heart, God will not despise. God will have that connection. Do good in your favor to Zion. Build the walls of Jerusalem. Then you will delight in the sacrifices of righteousness, in burnt offerings and whole offering. Then they will offer bullocks upon your altar. Wait a minute. We started off saying God doesn't like sacrifices, that God wants prayer. God wants our lips to move. God wants our heart to move, to be humble, to be open. And then we finish off by saying, build up the altar and we're going to do sacrifices. Split personality, right? No, it's because these two are not mutually exclusive. One of the things that's very important to wrap your head around in Judaism is that Judaism doesn't believe that action and intention are opposite ends of a spectrum. They are partners. That action leads to intention and intention leads to action. So the idea that my heart should be moving, my lips should be moving, my feelings should be moving, and I should be doing something goes very, very well in Judaism. Right? So God doesn't want just sacrifice. God wants the sacrifice with my heart, with my feelings, with my thoughts, with all that is part of me. Not an empty ritual, but a complete ritual. And it's completed by my own heart, my own soul. Doesn't make the sacrifices bad. It just means an empty sacrifice is bad. Following how this works then? Okay. With that in mind, we then move to the prophet Hosea. Return, O Israel, to the Lord your God, for you have stumbled in your iniquity. You've made a lot of mistakes. The prophets say that a lot. Take with you words and return to the Lord. Say to him, forgive all iniquity and accept that which is good. So we will render for bullocks the offering of our lips. Right? When you want to go before God, in the ancient world, the classic thing to do was to bring an animal. You would bring a sacrifice. Here is my dove, here is my sheep, here is my cow. You would bring a sacrifice to the altar to show your intention, to show your desire to enter into that relationship, or as Hosea is pointing out, have the altar. What do? You can still give the word, you can still give your feeling, you can still give your prayers. And throughout the book of the prophets, the books of the prophets, you see a constant criticism of people who would do the sacrifices, but not do the intention, who would bring the animal, but not bring their heart. And so it's not surprising that in Judaism that survived, it was among those people who said, yes, the animals were good because it was an amazing concrete symbol that actually did motivate and move us, the same way that if you want to say sorry to a friend, doing something more than just saying sorry is usually going to not only be appreciated by them better, but more importantly, will mean you take it more seriously. Right? Doing an actual like face-to-face apology means you think about your apology more than if you just like text them, sorry, we good. It's like better than nothing, but the more action you put into it, usually the more it actually moves you, because you wouldn't be doing that if you didn't feel it. And because you feel it, you want to do it. Like I said, action, intention, working together. Good. 2 Kings 8, if they sin against you, for there is no one that sins not, and you be angry with them and deliver them to the enemy, and they carry them away captive to the land of the enemy. Sounds a lot like Babylon. Yet they turn back and return to you with all their heart, their soul, and pray to you toward their land. Then hear their prayer and their supplication in heaven, your dwelling place, and maintain their cause. Now, modern Jewish people, or modern people of all types, may think that all sounds perfectly normal. That was rather shocking at the time, because many people associated the ability to truly connect and pray to God and for God to truly forgive them entirely with the altar of Jerusalem. And if Jerusalem had been destroyed, and if they were carried off to a foreign land, Babylon in this case, they lacked the tools to get back, right? It's like being kicked out and someone pulled the ladder away. But what the prophet is saying here is that no, you can always talk to God anywhere. The sacrifices, the altar, these were good, they were powerful, the symbolism and the function of them were absolutely essential for their time and place, but they're not the only way to connect to God. And in fact, doing only them without the intention is the opposite of connecting to God, as the other prophets say in great detail. We good? I know we're rushing, but we only have so much time. The connection to the altar goes so far as to make our schedule of services attached to the schedule of the altar. Now, probably haven't thought about that before, but the times of the day that we get together to pray and the number of times we do this is tied exactly to how the sacrifices were offered in Jerusalem on the altar. How so? Well, as it says here in Rambam, in the Mishnah Torah, as he gives a summary based off what was taught in the Talmud and Mishnah, the Great Assembly, which was the large group of officials that ruled after the time of Ezra, also established that the number of prayers would correspond to the number of times the daily sacrifices were offered in the temple. Therefore, 2 daily prayers were instituted corresponding to the 2 daily offerings, as well as an additional service corresponding to the 3rd offering, which was brought on special occasions. The morning prayer is called Shacharit, that is the 1st daily offering. The afternoon service is called Mincha, that was the 2nd daily offering. And the additional prayer service for special occasions is called Musaf. What kind of special occasions do we get? Well, Shabbat, for example. On Shabbat, we have Musaf. And so on Shabbat, we have a special bonus section of prayer. If you're here in our services, you'll know that it's the one that comes right after I finish my sermon. So on Shabbat, we have Musaf. And then in Shabbat afternoon, you would also have Mincha, but you would also have Mincha on Thursday afternoon. And you would have Shacharit on Monday morning. The prayers of Shacharit and Mincha happen every day of the week. The prayer of Musaf only happens on Shabbat and other holidays. Now, there's one other one that we're leaving out. The Great Assembly also established that there would be one prayer service in the evening, called Ma'ariv or Aravit, since parts of the afternoon sacrifice would be consumed on the altar throughout the night. So the nighttime also gets its own prayer service. Furiously jotting down notes. Now, why would we do this? What does prayer still do for us other than just mimic the sacrificial system? Well, Yehuda Halevi in the Kuzari, one of the most famous books in the Middle Ages, says, and his expression should be conducive with his thoughts, not adding to them. And in his prayer, he does not express himself by rote, like a starling or a parrot. Rather, each word is contemplated and intended. A person's prayer provides nourishment for his soul, just as food provides nourishment for his body. The influence of each prayer remains with a person until the subsequent prayer, just like the daytime meal sustains him until he eats the evening meal. So what is he saying here? Is he saying, first of all, when you pray, you're not just saying words. Now, that's going to be hard to fully absorb because what I just gave you was a book of words. And, this is a substantial book. And it looks like the words are the important thing. But what Kuzari and all the others that I'm going to show you tell us is the words are not the important thing. They are an important thing for helping us be able to actually express myself with my own contemplation and intentions. That the words have to become mine. And as we're going to talk about, you can even change the words to reflect yourself more within certain parameters. And that is what actually allows the soul to be fed. Now, how is the soul being fed by my words? Right? When I eat, I'm getting something in. When I pray, I'm giving something out, right? Kind of. Because what actually is happening, according to the Kuzari and others, is as I am thinking and contemplating and focusing on my prayer, it's not going out, it's actually going in to my spirit, into my soul. I am actually acknowledging my soul and saying, hey, I know I've been ignoring you while I've been at work, but let's talk. Right? Let me show you what I'm thinking. Let me show you what I'm feeling. You're having a conversation within yourself. It is a reflexive activity as much as an externalization of your own self. And that feeding of the soul, that time you make for your soul, is absolutely critical. As he says, it's just like feeding your body. And if you starve your soul by never encountering it, never speaking to it, never allowing that contemplation to penetrate into yourself, then it's the same as if you were starving yourself of food. And that's why in Judaism, we do this 3 times a day, right? Morning, afternoon, evening, and a bonus one on Shabbat and holidays. We're good? Now, again, don't be intimidated by the book. You don't read the book 3 times a day. If we did that, we'd never get anything else done. I'll show you which sections we do at different points, but there are, as I said, all of these services in the book. So it is much shorter than it might look at first appearance. So Rabbi Lord Jacobitz, a modern rabbi from England, that's why he gets to be called Lord. They get promoted to the house of the Lord when they're a chief rabbi. Summed it up like this. Like sacrifices, prayer is intended to change man, not God. Its purpose is to cultivate a contrite heart, to promote feelings of humility and inadequacy in man, whilst encouraging reliance on divine assistance. Notice, humility is not a sin. Right? Humility is a good way to embrace yourself and the world around. It doesn't mean that you think you're worthless. It just means that you have a more accurate estimation of your own worth. Right? I am not the most important thing in the entire galaxy. And I am not more important than everything else. And it's not like I know more than everyone else, and then everyone else can just, do whatever they want, but I'm just. No, humility means that you are open to the fact that you are vulnerable. And by being vulnerable, you will recognize that you have help. Those that don't think themselves vulnerable are the ones who never get help because they're constantly avoiding it. Through prayer, the worshiper becomes chastened, gains moral strength, and intensifies the quest of spirituality, thereby turning into a person worthy of response to his pleas. Not too bad, fairly clear. So how do we do it? How do we actually pray? Well, thankfully, we have a book called the Siddur. The word Siddur comes from the word for order, and meaning like something that is laid out in an order. And that is precisely what the Siddur does. But it shouldn't be seen as a straitjacket. The Siddur is not there to be recited. The Siddur is there to inspire. It is an anthology, if you will, of the greatest poems and expressions of spirituality from throughout Jewish history. 3,000 years ago, the Siddur didn't exist. Though there were psalms, of course, and there were different things that people would say, and there were different ways that people would express themselves. But, it wasn't exactly deep, and they weren't finely tuned from centuries of practice. They were rough around the edges. And over time, it became more and more filled in with more beautiful and complete expressions. It's a double-edged sword, but let's talk about that first part. In the morning, this is from the Mishnah, by the way, in the morning, one says 2 blessings before the Shema and 1 afterwards. And at night, 2 before and 2 afterwards. 1 long. Wherever they said to prolong, that means to make a long prayer, one may not shorten. To shorten, one may not prolong. To seal, one must seal. Not to seal, one must not seal. Perfectly clear, right? Typical Mishnah language, very short on words, very long on meaning. So what it's basically saying, we've got a structure. You have to say the Shema in the morning, you have to say in the Shema in the evening, because the Torah tells us that we say the Shema in the morning and we say the Shema in the evening. But around the Shema, we have said that there should be these additional prayers, and we'll talk about them in a bit more in detail. And those prayers, there are 2 that come before the Shema in the morning, and then we do the Shema, and then we do 1 prayer after it, and that's a unit. So it goes 2, Shema, 1, done. But in the evening, we do 2, Shema, 2, and done. And some of them are long and some of them are short, and keep them that way. Right? Don't take the long ones and make them short. Don't take the short ones and make them long. And some of them have special ways that we finish them off, that we seal them. It's called the Chatimah, which is sort of the finale, the final phrasing, which summarizes that particular paragraph or prayer. And so where those have these special finales, keep them. And where they aren't there, don't add them. So the basic structure is kind of a loose outline of you're going to do these couple different prayers, and they're going to see, as we're going to see, a couple different themes, and you should keep to basically this structure. But the actual details of what each prayer should be, a verbatim account of exactly what should be on the page, that did not exist when the Mishnah was being written. People would share, well, this is what I say, what do you say, and I think about this, and I think about this, and I say it this way, and you say it that way. But there wasn't a book that everyone used that was the same. In fact, that didn't eventually happen until we got printing presses, because prior to that, it was just impossible to have, excuse me, either it's my wife telling me there's a technical problem, or it's not something we need to discuss. Okay, no, it was impractical to produce a identical copy for everybody around the world. And so it was a loose structure. Rav Amram Gaon, which was around the 9th century CE, he did try to explain what was happening. He's actually credited as being the first person to write a Siddur. But what he actually did was write an answer to someone's letter. It'd be like someone sending you an email saying, so how do I drive? He's like, well, here are the main points. And he wrote, a long collection of things to say and do. And that was sort of passed around to other people as the prime example of what prayer should look like. That became kind of the nucleus around which the modern Siddur eventually evolved. The order of prayers and brachot, blessings, for the entire year that you requested, that has been shown to us by heaven, we deem appropriate to set forth and lay out in the manner in which the tradition was passed down to us, as compiled by the rabbis during the period of the Mishnah and the Gemara. Basically, this is what I got more or less from people from before me, so you can see the answer to your question. But notice, he recognized that someone would ask the question, because way around the other side of the world where the question came from, they didn't have a book which told them what to do. They only had the loose structure that was explained in the Mishnah. Still with me? Did I lose you with the history? Okay. So we have a book now, lots of words now. Does that mean we're done? No, quite the opposite. It is taught, we're back in the Mishnah and the Talmud this time, it is taught. Rabbi Yossi says, anyone who changes from the prescribed formula instituted by the sages for blessings has not fulfilled his obligation. He loses this argument. Remember, we're going to talk more about argumentation in our Machloket class next week. Rabbi Meir says, even if one said, blessed is the one who created this thing, it is so beautiful, which is like not exactly the most elegant form of expression, he has fulfilled his obligation. And that is not an official blessing. That is not an official prayer. So what Rabbi Meir is saying is if a person says the intent, even with the wrong words, that weren't the formal, special words that had been refined and put together by the sages, you've still done your job. You have still fulfilled the purpose of prayer, even if you didn't use the right words. Rabbi Yaakov Berachah said in the name of Shmuel, the law follows Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir wins. Technically, if you don't know the right words, if you say the right feeling, you've still covered yourself and done what was right. An incident involving Rav supports this ruling. A certain Persian came to Rav and said, what about me? I don't know how to make a proper blessing. So when I eat bread, I say, blessed is the one who created this bread. Have I fulfilled my obligation? Rav said, yes. Right? So you can actually do your obligation by just saying, thanks for bread, God. You know what, God? You are amazing. You made an apple. Now, Judaism does have a set of blessings that we use, and we'll talk about them later. But what I want you to understand is that the set of blessings we have are designed to allow us to say the absolute maximum of what we want to say without struggling to find the right words. It is like reading beautiful poetry or hearing a wonderful song and saying, yes, that's how I feel. I couldn't have said it myself because I'm not a poet or I'm not, a songwriter. But now that I hear those words, yes, that is exactly how I'm feeling. And even more, now I realize something else about my feelings because they've been put into these beautiful words. So we do keep the words that have come down to us because they are amazing. That's why they've come down to us. But we have to make sure that we are also recognizing the intention, not only the recitation. As Machzor Vitri says, Rabbi Yaakov ben Meir rules that one may be creative with all 18 blessings. That's what we call the core of the Amidah, which we'll come to, whether for words of thanks and praise or for one's needs, since one is merely extrapolating on the theme of the blessing. So, as if having all of these words wasn't enough, you can riff on them and improvise to your heart's content. In fact, you should. If you don't allow yourself to express something unique that isn't on the page, then you're not truly engaging with the prayer. And that is, in fact, what I have found to be one of the biggest differences between people who get prayer and people who do prayer. Doing prayer is fine because it is still a spiritual exercise. It is still something that keeps you in good spiritual shape, just like physical exercise. But to get prayer, you have to allow yourself to actually create the prayer or add to it in some way that reflects the uniqueness of yourself in this place, in this moment, in this time, and this set of circumstances. And allowing yourself the freedom to make up your own words that are in harmony with whatever prayer you are actually doing is where you begin to have the freedom to explore what's going on in this relationship. That make sense? Good. From Rabbi Yom Tov, if one could not fulfill one's obligation through such changes, the sages should have recorded the text of the blessings and specified the exact number of words. He's being very logical. It's like, look, if you had to say a prayer in a particularly precise way, 43 words, right, between the first blessing and the end, then they would have written all 43 words down for us in all of the books we have, so that we would do exactly those 43 words and no other words. But they didn't. Oh. And because they didn't, we know we don't have to. That is to say, because they didn't write all 43 words, we are allowed then to have 40 words or 45 words or whatever number is needed for us to express ourselves on the theme of that blessing. We'll just wait for the entry. One last little bit on this before we press on with some more examples. Some samples on the next page? Almost, yes. She's listening to it as she's coming in. I can hear my own voice coming down the hallway. That is really creepy. Okay. So one last thing, which is very, very important when you are first learning about Judaism, whether you were born Jewish but didn't learn a whole lot when you were young, or whether you are coming to this as an adult, all blessings may be said in any language, provided they are said in the way the sages established them. Right? God understands every language. There are special nuances to Hebrew, and there are special gifts in its poetry. And there are special benefits of using the language that is used by Jews around the world and used by Jews throughout history. And I'm not taking away from that. I do pray in Hebrew for the vast majority of my Tefillah, because it does something for me spiritually that I don't quite get in English. But if you don't have Hebrew, that's okay. You can work on it and should, but any language is fine, because you actually know what you're saying and feel what you're saying. And if the Hebrew can't quite get you there because you just don't comprehend it, then use a language that you can comprehend. Mar, you are welcome to take one of the sidurs. That's yours to keep.
Thank you.
All right, so let's actually break this down, because I've been using the word prayer and blessing. What's that? Add to the collection, yes. Sidur Sim Shalom, for anyone who's watching at home, this is Sidur Sim Shalom that the students are getting. For those of you who are my students who aren't here tonight, don't worry, I'll get it to you later. Sidur Sim Shalom was the last fully contained Sidur put out by the conservative movement, which has everything for weekdays and for Shabbat and for holidays. Not high holidays, you still have to get a separate machzor for that. But it is very, very comprehensive, and so I like it very much as a resource. All right, so I've been throwing around the word prayer and blessing kind of interchangeably, but technically, they have technical purposes within Judaism. So prayer, I'm over here, right? Prayer is said as an expression of praise, thanksgiving, petition, or sometimes those themes mixed together. A blessing, on the other hand, are a type of prayer. Prayers often include a blessing. You'll recognize it in Judaism by the Baruch Atah formula, which we'll talk about in more detail. It's a type of under a prayer in general, but it is a special form of acknowledgement of God in the world. Blessed is the Redeemer. Blessed is the one who commanded us to wrap in the fringes, the blessing we say when we put on the talit. Blessed is the one who brings forth bread from the earth, which is a blessing that we say before we eat bread. So blessings are more specific formulas that reference a particular moment or action that we are engaging in, whereas prayers are praise, thanksgiving, petition, or some combination. Obviously, there are elements of these in a blessing, and obviously blessings will often go as a partner to a prayer, but they do have a different function that just works together. All right, so let's look at that in more detail. So praise, types of prayer that has praise. We have many different prayers that help us see God and express how amazing God is through these different ways. We can talk about God as creator, God as our helper, God as our sustainer, our redeemer, our teacher, as being all-knowing, as being timeless. by helping us praise God, it helps us understand what our relationship is to God, which is we're not so much, but also what our relationship is to God, which is God is connected to us, even though God is all of this. Right? It's like having the best celebrity buddy ever. Right? It's I'm not so much, but do you know who my friend is? and do you know who my friend is? Right? And that expression of praise towards God is not just stroking God's ego. It is helping us to understand ourselves, helping us to understand the world, helping us to put other people in perspective, because trust me, your best celebrity buddy is nothing compared to God, and recognizing how we can turn to God and turn to God's rules and guides for life, the Torah, in order to live. So praise is not something we do just to make God happy because we're complimenting. It's very important and very hard to recognize that God doesn't have emotional needs the way humans do. And so activities that might seem a little over the top that we would, if we did it for a human, are perfectly appropriate for when we're doing it about God, because the actual object that is being changed, as I mentioned before, is us. Right? We're not making God happy when we tell God that God is great. God knows God is great. He doesn't need us to say it. It's not like, oh, he likes me. That's not how God works. But we change when we recognize the greatness of God. Thanksgiving, the same way. God is not waiting for a thank you card, but we need to express thanksgiving. And there are many, many prayers that help us appreciate what God has done for life, for the blessings we have already enjoyed, for the Torah, for a specific blessing about something that is happening now, for our body, for the gift of sight, for the clothes that we wear, for understanding, and the list goes on and on and on. This idea of recognizing our gratitude and feeling gratitude is a very important part of our spiritual training. And it's a very important part of general psychological well-being. Even for people who are agnostic and atheist, if they are emotionally balanced, they are practicing some form of regimen of gratitude, some way of recognizing the gifts that they have and how to appreciate them so that their life will feel fuller and more meaningful because they see what is already around them. So Thanksgiving is very, very important. Praise is very, very important for us. Again, we're not stroking God's ego. We're not trying to butter God up. We're trying to help us have a perspective. God is amazing, and we already have been given many amazing gifts. That worked pretty well? Okay, again, we're rushing through. There's a reason why this is a book rather than a PowerPoint presentation, and there's a lot more detail to be said on all of these, but I just want to get the broad structure. Petition is the one that still confuses everyone. This is what everybody thinks of when they think of prayer, right? God, please let me pass this test. God, please let me get this promotion. God, please don't let them ask me about this because I don't want to have this conversation, right? All the different things that we are asking for is what most people think of about petition. Now, petition always comes with praise and thanksgiving. This reminds us that we turn to God with our needs. We have to be humble, and we have to acknowledge what we've already received, right? God, you're amazing. You've already done so much for me, and I would like to talk to you about Our requests should always be for the true priorities in life. Our requests should always be joined to our own efforts. We don't ask God to do something for us that we're not willing to work for ourselves. And our requests should never be for God to change what has already occurred. There's much longer discussion within rabbinic law about this, but for example, the classic example is if you are coming home and you see smoke coming from your village and you realize there's a fire, you don't say, please God, don't let it be my house. Because it already is either your house or not your house. Praying once the fire has started, that the fire not be where it is a complete misunderstanding of how the world works. Right? Prayer is not asking God to use a time machine to rewind and change things so that they're different from their now. As long as you don't know whose house it is, then as long as the fire hasn't started, so for example, you're about to leave your house, please God, I hope my house doesn't burn down while I'm away. Perfectly fine prayer. Your house still might burn down. Don't get me wrong, right? Prayer is not some magic protection. But praying once the fire has begun is not effective. You can pray, I hope the fire gets put out quickly. I hope, that anybody who was hurt will be healed. All of those things are perfectly fine. But having a perspective on how we pray from the timeline of our life is something that is very tricky and does not come naturally to most of us. Because most of us have an instinct to pray about something that is happening in front of us as though that thing could change. That can't change. The next minute can change. But right now is done. And that change in our brain is very, very hard for most of us to get our head around. Because we want what I'm seeing to not be like that. We want it to be different. We want it to be better, or we want it to stop, or not to be at all. And I can't understand that isn't how God works. Because I've already experienced it. What's God going to make me unexperience it? That's not the flow of life. That's not what God wants from our life. We must remember as well that we will not be given everything that we want. Right? And there are lots of reasons why you don't get everything that you want or pray for. Sometimes it's not possible in the plan of the world. Sorry, it's just not going to happen, right? I want to be president. Yeah, but the overall flow of the world is not going to work to let you become president, and it might not even be good for you or the world if you became president. Right? You can pray for it all you want, but God wouldn't be doing you a favor if he gave it to you, and he would definitely not be doing the world a favor if he gave it to you. It may conflict with free will. God, I wish that she would fall in love with me. Yeah, well, that's kind of up to her. Right? God's not going to go and change her brain so that all of a sudden she's in love with you. Because to do that would mean God would deny free will in the world. And if God denies free will in the world, then the actions of all humans become meaningless. God did not put us on this world in order that we be little robots that went around as God would change us with like a puppet. God put us on this world so we would make decisions. And if God was to take away someone's free will to answer your prayer, that would be literally taking away the purpose of life. So you can't really expect that to happen. God also would not answer because sometimes it has to be obtained by our direct efforts. Right? God, please make me rich, you say while sitting on the sofa. Okay, no problem as long as you're taking a break and you're going to get up and still work. But if you think that God is going to make you rich while you do nothing, then you don't understand how this all works together. Yes, God can certainly help enrich you through your activities, although sometimes that might be taking away others' free will, and sometimes that might also not be the best plan for the world. Plus, he may already have given you what you asked for, but you didn't realize. Right? God may have already made you rich. If only you would call your mother and find out that she actually has, an antique that could be sold that would be $500,000. But you don't know because you don't call your mom. Right? So sometimes we have already been blessed in ways that we don't realize. God, help me meet that special person. You may already have met them and you just have been wrapped in yourself and didn't notice it. There are many things that people will pray for that they don't recognize that the prayer has already been answered. Or that if it were answered the way I think I want it answered, it would in fact be harmful to myself or to others. God, please make me rich. And God's going, yeah, no, you got a real compulsive addictive behavior. If I give you too much money all at once, you are going to burn and die. So I'm going to do you a favor and not have you be successful in that way. There are times when God does not answer our prayers because to answer them would be worse for us than for them to be unanswered. God will sometimes take care of us by saying no, just like any good parent will often take care of their children by saying no. You cannot eat the entire cake, right now, because that would not be good for you. Oftentimes, though, we don't understand why we can't eat the cake, and sometimes we're asking for things that sound perfectly reasonable, but for some level of what God can see wouldn't quite work. Now, these are not the only explanations because there is no one-size-fits-all explanation. If someone comes to me and says, Rabbi, I've prayed so hard for X, Y, and Z, but I haven't gotten it, I can't just say, well, that's because of answer number 3. It doesn't work like that. I don't know in any particular case why or how a prayer is or isn't answered. We're not able to see with the eyes of God. But what we can know is that when we partner with God, when we show our allegiance to the things that really matter, that we're willing to work with them, and that we're not trying to change what is already there, but are trying to change the future so that it is better, that things do actually improve for ourselves, for the world, for that is around us. It doesn't always happen the way we expect, doesn't always happen on the timeline that we want, but it does make a difference when we are willing to line up. And that idea of using the true priorities along with our own efforts is one of the other big benefits of prayer from just a purely psychological point of view, where when we remind ourselves of the things that actually matter, which is what the prayer book gives us as a list, it actually helps us focus on things that really matter, rather than the trivial things that sometimes occupy us more than they should. And reminds us, okay, well, actually that's more important than what I've been doing. If I put more effort into that, lo and behold, you actually turn out to be a happier, healthier, and more balanced person. All right, onward, because I'm looking at the clock. We're going to skip Einstein. Great letter that he wrote in response to a person's question about prayer, but we need to get back to the meat of the prayer. Combines the body and soul, right? The body. When we pray, we free the body of distractions, of bad smells, of noises, of interruptions. Right? When you go to pray, silence your phone. Please do yourself a favor. Right? When you go to pray, you make sure that you're not praying near your trash can. You make sure that you're not praying with the TV on or other things that could distract you. Now, some people can tune them out, and after much practice, it is certainly possible to pray with some distractions around you. But in general, we try to move away from those distractions to give ourselves a chance where our body is not constantly calling attention to itself. We often, for many of our prayers, will stand and we'll bow and we'll move in ways that are meant to emulate how we would behave in front of royalty, or how you'd behave in front of someone you respect. Most of us don't exactly respect royalty anymore, but these motions you'll often see of people bowing, of people going from one side to the other, which are acknowledging what was common in the past, which is that anybody who was royalty would have people around them that were part of their court, and the people around them were there for the glory of the monarch. That's why you see the bowing to the left and the right, because it's trying to say, I can only picture God as I would picture a human king, in the sense that they would be surrounded by that which gives them additional glory, additional servants. And most people visualize that in some angelic form. The soul, however, when we take time to pray, right, we try to prepare ourselves for prayer so that our soul is ready for this. We concentrate on the words and their meaning, as well as how they reflect on our own thoughts. And we pace ourselves through the service to hit the moments of greatest focus with the right spirit. The service is actually designed much like an exercise routine, where there is a warm-up, there is an escalation of spiritual activity, there's a climax, and then there is a cool down. And that structure of the service is designed spiritually to move you through those different modes, so that you are hitting different spiritual muscles at different times in preparation for the different stages that will come next. Does that make some sense? Okay. Basic structure. So there are two main parts of what we call tefillah, of what we call prayer. There is the Shema and its blessings, and there is the Amidah. We are commanded to recite the Shema twice a day, evening and morning. Each time it is accompanied by prayers of similar theme to focus us on its message. We'll talk about those prayers in a second. The Amidah is a separate prayer obligation. Now, usually people will think of them as being linked because they are printed next to each other in the prayer book. But they are each their own separate prayer opportunity and obligation. The Amidah is a set of 19 blessings. There are fewer of those on Shabbat and holiday. It's only 7 usually. And that is the core of our obligation to actually pray. So if you want to pray at other times, that's fine. But the Amidah is considered to be the centerpiece of when we are actually doing our prayers, so to speak, when we're fulfilling that mitzvah, that commandment. So how does this work? Well, when it comes to the Shema and its structure, on the Shacharit service in the morning, there is a very set pattern. In fact, if you want to take a look at this pattern, you can look at page 341 in the Sidurim that I handed round. And this is the same basic pattern, whether it is Shabbat or whether it is a weekday, but I'm going to show you the Shabbat version just because for some of you that might be a little more familiar, depending upon which prayer books you've been able to get a hold of before this. 341. And I should remind you that in different prayer books, they are sometimes with different page numbers, one for Hebrew, one for English. Sometimes they're with the same page numbers. This prayer book uses different page numbers. So if I say 341, which in this case is an English set of blessings, it's the same as what's on page 340 in the Hebrew. So just whatever page number I say, look next to it if you're wondering what I'm talking about. I'll generally refer to the English just because I think for most people here, English is the more comfortable language. So in page 341, we get the beginning of a prayer called Yotzer Or. By the way, one of the things you're going to discover, I don't mean to disillusion you, is that as you go through and learn the names of the prayers and you learn what the Hebrew actually means, you'll learn that the names of the prayers are basically either the first words or the last words of the blessing that summarize the prayer. Judaism is amazing at the prayer. Judaism is amazing at so many different things and teachings and wisdom. We're lousy at titles. The titles are just like, that one that goes blah, blah. And Yotzer Or is basically two of the words that are from the summation of this particular prayer. So Yotzer Or is a prayer that is about light. You can see that from the first lines of it, which is actually the third line down, third paragraph down. Praised are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, creating light and fashioning darkness, ordaining the order of all creation. So the theme is about light, but of course, as you can hear, what the real meta theme is of creation. So Yotzer Or, using the imagery of thanking God for the gift of light, which is what the rest of this page goes on to talk about in different details, is reminding us about the gift of creation. You see the picture? Okay. Now, that theme is carried on to page 343, and it is carried on to page 345, all the way to the bottom of the page, where we finish off with, praised are you, O Lord, creator of lights. That whole section is talking in many different forms, both literal and metaphorically, about the gift of creation that God has given and the greatness of God that reflects, and the importance of us in understanding it in many different ways and levels. We good? Okay, I know we're rushing this because we're almost out of time. Wow, I ran late today. Next prayer comes on page 346, and it is called Ahava Rabbah, because guess what the first two words of it are called? Ahava Rabbah. This blessing talks about love. Ahava literally means love. Great love is Ahava Rabbah, but it's not talking about love, just, romantic love. It is talking about the love that God has shown us, and in particular, through the symbol of Torah, through the gift of revelation. How do we know God loved us? Because God gave us Torah. Right? How do you know a parent loves you? Because a parent has actually tried to raise you with good guidance and instruction so you can be a good and competent adult. That is a sign of a really good parent. It's not the one who takes you to the Disneyland all the time. It's not the one who gives you the cake in the middle of the night. It's the one who actually helps you become a good person. And that's hard work, and that's how you know they love you. Because taking someone to Disneyland is kind of easy. It's a little expensive. So Ahava Rabbah talks about God's love and focuses through that love through the idea that God loved us enough to reveal instructions and guidance through Torah. And then in the middle of 347, guess what we get? Shema. Remember all the way back when we talked about in the Mishnah, there are two blessings and then the Shema. Well, we've had two blessings. Yotzer Or, Ahava Rabbah, creation, revelation, and now we get Shema. And Shema is basically is about the covenant, that we are bound and linked to God, and that connection is something that we live with all of our heart and all of our passion. It is something that we live by following certain commandments. The ones that are referenced in these particular paragraphs are talking about the mezuzah and tefillin and of teaching and of continuing to be involved in understanding. But it also is really talking about our relationship with God, that we are linked to God. Our actions matter. God has tried to guide us. God will continue to guide us. What we do is important. So we've got creation, revelation, and that relationship. And as we talked about before, we get one more blessing, which begins on page 350 and continues to the middle of page 352, called Emet V'Yatziv, in the morning, which is talking about God's faithfulness to us. And that faithfulness is understood as being most exemplified through the gift of redemption from Egypt and the promise of redemption for all time, that God is our Savior. And then again, I remind you, the word Savior means something very different in Jewish vocabulary as opposed to other faith traditions' vocabulary. Maybe the same in English, but that doesn't mean it means the same to the different groups. So we've got a pattern here. Creation equals revelation. Right? When you understand that there is creation, when you see the world around you, then God is revealed. Judaism, well, many people in Judaism, I would say the vast majority, do believe that the world is billions of years old. We believe in evolution. We believe in all the different ways that the world around us is understood scientifically. But we still see in that natural order and that natural world a revelation of God's existence and of God's gift to the world. Whether it happened in 7 days or 7 billion is really immaterial. What matters is that it happened. And that when we look at it, we can see its beauty and its wonder at it. But we don't stop there, because creation plus actual revelation, that is to say, creation plus the revelation not just of God's existence, but of God's instruction, the gift of Torah, that leads us to have a relationship with God. Right? It is not just enough for us to say, wow, the world's great. Wow, God's good and God told us how to live. We want to take that to have a relationship. We want to be connected to God, not merely living in God's world. Just a tenant. We want to be a roommate. And that tells us that if in this world that we now understand through the gift of relationship and with the passion, revelation, and with the passion of our relationship, creation plus revelation plus our relationship means the world can reach redemption. That the world can actually come to be a beautiful and perfect world that it was intended to be, but that is still being held up by our human decisions and mistakes. That's why these come in this order. Right? We need to talk about the gift of Torah and God's love. We obviously need to talk about redemption. We could have put this in a different order. Right? We could have said, "Way, God took us out of Egypt. That was great, and then He gave us Torah, and that was great revelation, and all of that was only possible because the world existed." Right? We could have talked about it the opposite direction. Perfectly fine, but it wouldn't have had the same spiritual move. God asks us to recognize the wonder of the world first, because that is the easiest thing for most people to recognize. Most people, when they get up and they see the sun, well, not at dawn maybe, but if they get up and they see the world around them, they hear the birds chirping, they feel the cool breeze on their face, you feel a certain stirring in yourself of, this is good. And this means something. This is important. That stirring opens us up to be available for the idea that there is more, that there can be something revealed that will help us move beyond our own self into a better and better world that can be created. This pattern is of how spiritual awakening happens. And so it's not by accident that the Siddur ends up having this order for our morning and evening prayers. Now, the evening prayers add in an additional blessing, asking for protection, because nighttime, even though we believe it's a normal part of the world, is still scary. And so it's normal to have those thoughts. And so it's not surprising that our prayer puts a little bit of extra emphasis on, and please let me wake up, right? And let the world not be quite so horrible. So that is a fourth blessing that happens at night. So this idea and this form flows through the service. Now, if you turn the page after 353, you will find the Amidah. And you will see on the Amidah, on 354, 355, that we start off with praise. Right? Praise to you, Lord our God, God of our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Nowadays, we also add in Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, the matriarchs. But this is the God who is great, mighty, and awesome. Right? So we start off with praise, as we talked about. This is getting us in the right frame of mind as we do the Amidah, as we draw close to God and have this moment of conversation. And then the second blessing on that same page is also a praise, right? Your might, O Lord, is boundless. You give life to the dead. Great is your saving power. I mean, these are like God's greatest accomplishments, the things that fill us the most with awe and wonder of what God can do that is beyond our natural understanding. And then on page 357, the third blessing of praise is the Kedusha. And this is where we acknowledge that God is holy in a way that we cannot completely comprehend, but that we can still strive for. You will find in the second paragraph there, where it says Kadosh, 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 that when we say this, you will see people rise up on their toes. This is in part emulation of the angels that are described in Isaiah's vision, who are said to have only 1 foot and who are rising in God's presence. And we are almost emulating as though we too were an angel. But in many ways, we're better than angels. Doesn't mean that we make fewer mistakes, but it means we have a power they don't. We have choice. So we rise up to understand, and then we come down to bring that understanding to this world. Right? We're not trying to escape this world. We're trying to live in this world the best. The Amidah continues on page 358 with the middle blessing that we have for Shabbat. As I mentioned, if this were a weekday service, let me just find my page. I had bookmarked it, but I didn't. Then if we were on the weekday morning, we'd be on page 110, all the way through page 121. And we would be doing a blessing for wisdom, a blessing for returning to God in repentance, a blessing for God's forgiveness for us, a blessing for God to redeem us, a blessing for the prosperity of the world, a blessing for blessing for healing, and then the blessing for prosperity of the world, and then a blessing of returning the Jews together to be unified, a blessing for justice, a blessing against those that would destroy what was good, a blessing on behalf of those who are good and righteous, a blessing for the return to Jerusalem, a blessing for the flowering of the shoot of David, which is basically to say that we should be ruled by ourselves rather than under the oppression of others, a blessing in general that God is willing to hear our prayers, and a blessing for the restoration of the worship in the sanctuary, bringing us back to that concept of avodah, of service. And then also on page 116, we say, thank you, thank you, thank you for all the miracles you do for us every day, whether it be morning, afternoon, or evening. And finally, on page 120, we have a prayer, Sim Shalom, for peace. Those are the 19 blessings or prayers that we have of petition on a weekday. On Shabbat, we don't do the prayers of petition because on Shabbat, we are looking at the world as though it were completed. It is a time of rest. So we don't want to bring to mind all the things that we need to be doing. On Shabbat, we need to be resting, not going down our list of, I need to work on this, I need to work on this, I need to work on. Enjoy the world on Shabbat. Saturday night after Havdalah, boom, then you can get back to work. And we will leave it there, but little time for questions if you guys have anything. I know I went a bit late. I hope you didn't mess up your schedules.
Well, I have a question for the Amidah.
Yes.
Because when I'm doing the Amidah, I was telling Gerard in the synagogue with everybody, it's like they either going faster than me or they have a shortcut that I don't know.
Okay.
Because when I'm in the second page, I already see the people doing this and sitting down. So I said, I'm doing the same thing, but I'm not going to be standing by myself there. So I did the same thing. And then I sit down. That doesn't mean that I finish.
Okay. So some very practical issue. So first of all, if you need more time, spiritually or just physically, to read the words of the Amidah, and it has nothing to do with like how quick you can read. It just sometimes people need to express themselves more. If you know that's going to be the case, move to the back before you start. And then you don't have to worry about people wondering, why is she still standing next to me, right? Just move to one of the back rows and you'll be fine. And take all the time you need. You'll know, what do I say at the end of every Amidah? Exactly. If you are still davening, please continue at your own pace. and then I tell the page number of where the Shliach Tzibor, where the leader of the service is going to continue
But
from.
I don't want to miss that.
And
either.
well, yeah, so it's the question of what you're going to miss is hard. So first of all, let's talk about why some people go very fast. So for many people, it's because they're using Hebrew, and Hebrew is about 30% faster than English. Right? Hebrew is a shorter language. The words are shorter, the syllables are shorter, there are fewer gaps in between words because prepositions and prefixes and things are added to the words. So if you print a book in Hebrew, it's about 30% shorter than the English version of the same book. I got a copy of like Harry Potter, and it's much, much thinner than my English copy of Harry Potter. Same size font, it's just Hebrew is compact. So Hebrew's a little faster. And if you've been doing it 3 times a day for much of your life, you get faster at it, right? I mean, for me, driving between my house and the synagogue, I can do that, in an instant because I know exactly where to turn. I know where to slow down. I know what the lights are going to be. It's I'm flowing. And nothing, can stop me. If I give someone directions, they're going to be stopping at each signal. They're going to be checking where they're going. They're going to slow down a little earlier than they need to, and they're going to be more. It takes longer. So people who have done it a lot, they naturally get faster. Also, when you do it a lot, spiritually, it's easier to be in the zone. It doesn't take you as long to warm up. It doesn't take you as long to get the feeling of engagement. It's you can start with it's like your 0 to 60 is much faster. You accelerate into the prayer much more quickly. And some people don't have as much to say. So we talked about that much earlier, that each person is allowed to adapt the prayer to what they need to express. And if they happen to shorten some of the prayers in the Amidah because that's all they need to say for that day, they are allowed to do that. They are allowed to express it in their own words. Some people also, honestly, don't know what they're supposed to be doing because not everybody has come to a class like this. Not everyone has tried to read the Siddur. And so they know they're supposed to be doing something, and the parts we do together, they're there. But when I say continue, privately, they're not sure what they're supposed to be doing, and they're afraid to ask. And so sometimes they'll just sort of sit and they'll do their own prayer, or they'll stand, they'll do their own prayer, and then they'll sit. And that also happens. But take all the time you need. And if you feel more comfortable not being in the middle, like aisle, a middle row, then move to another row before we start the Amidah. That's fine. It's better to take the time to get used to how this works. You'll speed up with time, and then you won't feel as awkward about it. But you shouldn't not pray fully because you're worried about other people, because then you're not going to get the full experience, and then other people are also going to wonder. And plus, the more people who actually take the full experience and who take the full time, the more comfortable everyone else is going to feel taking more time. Right? If one person sits down like after 10 seconds, then other people wonder, wait, am I supposed to sit down? But if one person stands for extra time, people will also wonder, well, maybe I don't have to sit down so fast next week. Maybe I can take a little more time. And so standing a little bit longer will help other people choose to stand longer and give more time for their expression. So
I thought it was a shortcut. And then I enjoy going with the whole congregation, don't fall behind either. So.
Right. And that's, I get that and understand it, but sometimes there's no choice, right? In the classic world, if you were to show up late to services, this happens occasionally. People show up late. Technically, you would just start your service from the beginning. There's a few rules about lining up, but you just start when you got in, and you'd be completely out of sync with everyone else in the room. Right? They'd be doing, one prayer, and you'd be like 10 pages back. That's okay. In Judaism, prayer is about each person. We are together, yes, so that we can do so we can do the Kedusha, so we can do the Baruch Hu, certain prayers that need a minyan, that need 10 people. But each person is doing their own prayer, and only each person can do their own prayer. Right? I can't pray for you. I mean, I can pray about you, but I can't pray instead of you. Right? You can't say, oh, well, the rabbi's praying, I don't have to. No, my prayers are my prayers. And I include my congregation in my prayers, but I don't replace the congregation with my prayers. Each person needs to be praying as well. Now, if you don't know how to pray, yes, it is true. You can listen to someone else's prayer and you can say amen. That's a way to still be praying without. But that was a rule that was written before we all had books. Now we've all got a book, and even if you don't know the Hebrew, you probably know the English. And if you don't know the English, find one in a language you do know. And then you don't have to worry about listening to someone else and saying amen and like hoping you understand what they're saying. And no, you can do it in your own way, in your own language, like we talked about earlier, and that is absolutely just as good. Well, almost just as good. The Hebrew is still nice. So, very important question. And any other questions? Yes.
I was wondering if there were like any prayers that that I had to do with like a minyan or just by myself.
So yes, so prayers for a minyan. Let's talk about the weekday ones, because those are the ones that you're more likely to be by yourself, because Shabbat, hopefully you can find a community. So first of all, weekday service. I'm going to show you the shortest version, right? Because like I talked about before, the Shema plus the Amidah, that's the core of a weekday morning service. There is a lot of preliminary, which is meant to warm you up and get you ready. And if you have the time, that is amazing and wonderful and beautiful. A lot of people don't have the time, and I don't want them to say, well, if I can't do everything, I won't do anything. That's not the right attitude. So I'll show you what is the actual minimum required form. So if you are on page 96, the top two lines where it says reader and congregation, then reader, that's called the Baruch, because that's the first word. We only do that with a minyan. So if you were doing this at home, you'd begin on the praised are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, creating light. That line is where you'd begin. And then you would continue all the way through without worrying about a minyan till page 104. And you do all of that without a minyan at your own pace. And again, if you find the paragraphs of the Shema, we do because they are quotes from the Torah. We do read those in the actual words that are there because we don't change God's Torah. But the prayers around them, if you need to extrapolate, if you need to say your own way of saying it, if you need to connect the words in your own way, even if it means it's a little bit shorter, that's okay. Then we're on page 107 for the Amidah.
These squares represent them. Page 104.
Oh, so in this book, the squares represent where you would usually hear the leader doing things out loud. So they're kind of like little cue cards, and we have them in the new Siddur in the sanctuary too. But I think they're like filled in like red. I like the little red arrows. That's it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I remember those.
Yeah. Same idea. It's basically saying if you hear someone singing on this page, it's probably here. So that way, if you're not familiar, you can look and find where they are on the page. So the Amidah, which we recite while standing, page 106, we do both of those two prayers. Page 108, we don't do unless we have a minyan. The Kedusha, we only do with a minyan. And if we don't do that, then we do the blessing. Hold on, where did they put this in this book? It's been too long since I've used this one. Okay, yeah. So if we don't do that on page 110, then we do the top line, the Atah Kadosh. Right? That's the mini Kedusha when we don't have a minyan. It's just one sentence. And then we do everything except where it says like only fast or only Hanukkah or whatever. Everything else we do until we get to the end of the Amidah on page 121. You are then technically done. Now, most people will still do what is known as Tachanun, which is a very introspective prayer that we only do on weekdays. So if you've only been to a Shabbat service, you've probably never seen it. You'll find the instructions in here. We usually will also do the Aleinu. We'll also do the Kedusha de Sidra. We'll also do a psalm for the day. There are other things that we usually will add in to our service. But technically, if you were like absolutely crunched for time, if you just did the Shema and the blessings around it, and you just did the Amidah, you would still check it off, and you would still be doing that minimum feeding of your spirit. And then as you go, you're going to find you want more. But there's a reason why the Siddur grew. It's not because people just wanted to keep writing. It's because the more you do this, the more you want to do it. And the more you want to say. And then you go, wow, that's a really good way of saying it. I want to say that every day. And then people keep adding and adding and adding.
And what about the Modani and the Birko?
Berachah Shachar and Pesukei Zimra. So those are all warm-up blessings. They are amazing. They are good. Absolutely, those should be a goal long-term. But as far as the obligatory core, the Shema and its blessings and the Amidah are the core. So if you have the time and you have the space to do it, absolutely. The rest of the service, everything else that you'll see there where it says morning service, it's all wonderful. There's a reason it survived 2,000 years of editing and over, we've got, the best version ever. But for practical considerations, it is important to remember what is the minimum core that needs to be preserved. Because I've met some people who they'll do all their preliminary, which is, as you saw, like, 90 pages of preliminary stuff. Well, 45, because half English, half Hebrew. And then they rush through the other stuff. It's like, no. If you're going to rush the preliminary and do the Shema and its blessings and the Amidah with more time and with more feeling. So if you need to make sure you have time and concentration, right? This is something else I need to say as maybe the final word for tonight. It is very hard to push yourself to have concentration for the full length of a full service when you're just starting. Right? The concentration is a muscle. And this type of concentration, of spiritual concentration, is not something that comes automatically. It comes with practice. So when you start with a shorter, more manageable piece, it becomes easier to focus. And then you see the benefit of that. And then it's easier to expand and expand and expand. It's just like going weightlifting, right? You don't walk over and say, oh, I can do 500 pounds. Right? No. Start with the 25, right? Build up to that. And eventually you'll be lifting 500, right? Eventually you'll have concentration for 3.5 hours or 5 hours on Yom Kippur. You'll get there eventually, but start small.
To me, the Shema and the Amidah is the 500, and then the Moda Ani, the Birko Hashar.
Well,
That's the like.
They are, but for some people they'll get exhausted with the lightweight, and they'll never get to the heavyweight.
That's me.
Yeah. So start with the and its blessings first, right? And just give yourself time to read the words, think about them. Don't push yourself to be laser focused when you start. And eventually you will get into the zone. Mm-hmm. But it's a skill that is developed. Mm-hmm. All right. Let me see if I can hit end.